to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Hello and welcome to the program. We're covering top stories from the United States and around the world, including the latest on President-elect Donald Trump's nascent administration. We'll get to all of that in a moment, but first, here's a look at the latest headlines. President-elect Donald Trump names former ICE Director Tom Homan to oversee the country's borders as part of the incoming administration. The Republican also called Homan the new border czar. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's held classified discussions with Donald Trump on the next steps regarding Iran. Netanyahu added that he's spoken with Donald Trump 3 times since the Republican won the race for the White House. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba wins the parliamentary vote to retain his chair. This after the Prime Minister's party lost its majority for the first time in 15 years, forcing the country into snap elections in October. Haiti's Transitional Presidential Council fires Prime Minister Gary Conille, who was appointed in May. The council has named prominent businessman Alex Didier Fils-Aimé as the Caribbean nation's new leader. And 2 powerful earthquakes strike eastern Cuba, shaking buildings in Santiago de Cuba, the island's second largest city. Cuban officials say no deaths have been reported. However, hundreds of buildings have been completely destroyed. We begin in the United States. President-elect Donald Trump reportedly spoke to Russian leader Vladimir Putin in recent days, a claim that Russia has in fact denied. A report by the Washington Post said that the 2 leaders discussed the war in Ukraine, and Donald Trump advised Putin against escalating the conflict. Now, according to the report, the president-elect also reminded the Russian leader that Washington has a sizable military presence in Europe. However, the Kremlin has rejected the report, saying Putin has no concrete plans to speak to Donald Trump. Reports of the call comes days after the president-elect had a conversation with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky over the phone.
Today, I believe that President Trump indeed wants a fast solution. He wants, but this doesn't mean it will happen.
President Zelensky was among the first few world leaders to congratulate Donald Trump after his victory in the presidential election. But critics say Donald Trump's re-election and his reported call with Putin could bring bad news to the Ukrainian president. Throughout his campaign, Donald Trump criticized the scale of America's military and financial aid to Ukraine. Donald Trump vowed to end the war within a day without telling exactly how, in fact, he plans to do so.
Through weakness and incompetence, Joe Biden has brought us to the brink of World War III. We're at the brink of World War III, just in case anybody doesn't know it. As president, I will bring back peace through strength. I would have a peace deal negotiated within 24 hours.
Last week, Putin congratulated Donald Trump for defeating Vice President Kamala Harris and said Moscow was open for dialogue with Washington on the Ukraine crisis.
This is his last term. After all, what he will do is a question for him. But what has been said publicly so far? Basically, I don't want to comment now on what was said during the election campaign. I think that it was said consciously in the fight for the voters' votes. But it doesn't matter. But what was said concerning the desire to restore relations with Russia, to help end the Ukrainian crisis, in my opinion, seems to me to be at least worthy of attention.
Meanwhile, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says President Joe Biden will try to convince Donald Trump not to pull support from Ukraine when the two meet on Wednesday. Under the Biden administration, the United States has committed over $170 billion in aid to Ukraine to battle Russian forces. Donald Trump, however, will probably force Ukraine to cede territory and give up on its ambitions of joining the NATO alliance, a deal that Kyiv is likely to reject. The race for the White House is over, but the blame game and finger-pointing is only just beginning. In a recent interview, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said if President Joe Biden had ended his re-election campaign sooner, Democrats could have had other candidates in the race. Pelosi added that her party could have held an open primary, which seemed impossible as President Biden immediately endorsed Kamala Harris after dropping out of the race. An open primary would have given a chance for several candidates to compete against each other and get elected to succeed Joe Biden as the presidential nominee. Pelosi further added that Kamala Harris would have done well in the primaries, which would have made her an even stronger candidate.
The anticipation was that if the president were to step aside, that there would be an open primary. And as I say, Kamala may have, I think she would have done well in that and been stronger going forward. But we don't know that. That didn't happen. We live with what happened. And because the president endorsed Kamala Harris immediately, that really made it almost impossible to have a primary at that time.
Reports say Pelosi, in fact, is the one who led the Democratic push to oust Joe Biden from the election race after his disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris's aides say they ran the best campaign they could, but Joe Biden was the singular reason why the Democrats lost this election. The vice president's former communications director, Jamal Simmons, says the commander-in-chief should resign in the next 30 days to make Kamala Harris the first woman president. Meanwhile, independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who ran for president as a Democrat both in 2016 and in 2020, has blamed the party for abandoning the American working class.
Here is the reality. The working class of this country is angry, and they have reason to be angry. We are living in an economy today where people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck.
The senator also said that Donald Trump appealed strongly to Americans stressing over the economy, even if he made controversial remarks. With the loss of a crucial election, the infighting among Democrats seems to get bitter with each passing day as they continue to blame President Biden and reflect on what went wrong with the vice president's election bid. Also, in the wake of Donald Trump's victory, some of America's most prestigious campuses have paused to catch their breath. At Harvard and Princeton, shockwaves rippled through classrooms, with professors canceling courses and offering new spaces for students to regroup, reflect, and recover. From art therapy to listening circles, universities turned to kindness, assuring students they weren't alone in processing this emotional election. Our next report brings you more on student fears as Donald Trump takes office once again.
American students awoke to a somber, hushed campus following Donald Trump's unexpected victory. As the news spread across, Harvard and Princeton universities last week pro-Kamala Harris students were particularly shaken, prompting university professors to extend deadlines and offer supportive spaces to process the results. According to the Harvard Crimson, a student-run paper, the Ivy League university canceled multiple courses, with several students raising concerns of being terrified to be an American. Horrified students even voiced concerns for their parents back home, raising questions what will happen to them, with some pointing out how Americans themselves are responsible for this outcome. Alarmed with the situation, some professors made attendance optional and relaxed quiz requirements. Others baked lemon bars and offered their office as a space to process the election. Princeton took similar measures. The Daily Princetonian reported that the university health services hosted several post-election listening circles, allowing students to gather in person or virtually. Polls conducted by the Daily Princetonian before and on Election Day even highlighted how students in large numbers were favoring the vice president, and how they were left completely distraught after the sweeping outcome. However, the condition of distress didn't stop there. A cultural understanding group even hosted a community care dinner. The meals served there were described as sacred and seasoned to promote a sense of togetherness. But while the universities went above and beyond to wrap students in a cocoon, some wondered if this was going a bit too far. For many social media users, what was happening at these Ivy League universities was unbelievable. From calling Harvard a cesspool of anti-Semitism to calling students crybabies, the internet exploded to defame the elite graduates. Yet as both universities poured resources into creating comfort zones, some observers raised eyebrows, asking if the students truly need art therapy and sacred dinners just because their candidate didn't win? With an uncertain political future ahead, will Harvard and Princeton's young intellectuals buckle up, or will they always expect a safe space every time life throws them an outcome that doesn't fit their bubble?
And now to the war in Europe. Russia has assembled a force of 50,000 soldiers, including around 10,000 from North Korea, to carry out an assault on the Ukrainian positions in the Kursk region. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky publicly warned of North Korea's involvement last month and slammed China for zero response to the North Korean development.
The information I have received recently, the Russian Federation discussed this issue with the West and confirmed that yes, there are military personnel from North Korea who will fight against Ukraine. I'm surprised by this silence out of China, honestly. I cannot say China is on our side, but China is one of the security guarantors in your region. At least this is what we have believed. And now, there is silence.
According to the New York Times, the North Korean troops are being deployed in an attempt to retake areas that Ukraine captured in an August raid. While Ukraine had success at first, Russian forces have regained ground in the Kursk and Belgorod provinces and continue to make gains in eastern Ukraine. A Ukrainian commander told CNN that North Korean troops were taking part in direct combat operations, and among the personnel were specialist artillerymen and snipers. Meanwhile, air raid sirens blared across Ukraine, including Kyiv, as Russia launched a massive bombing operation. According to Ukraine's State Emergency Service, the Russian attacks partially destroyed residential buildings, causing fires and extensive damage.
How was it? It was scary. I heard the sound of the drone. Then the sound faded, and then it hit this house. I was thrown to the ground with a blast wave. It was all in a mere second.
The involvement of North Korean troops in Ukraine raises tensions in Europe significantly, marking the first time a third country is directly putting boots on the ground. South Korea says it will in fact send a military delegation to Ukraine to gather intelligence on North Korean troop movement. Meanwhile, NATO members are concerned that the Russia-Ukraine war will slowly see Putin's allies, particularly North Korea and China, participating more actively going forward. And finally, from the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Diwali reception at 10 Downing Street was intended to celebrate the Hindu festival. However, it has received a lot of backlash due to cultural insensitivity. Party attendees were upset by the inclusion of non-vegetarian snacks on the menu along with beer and wine, which are considered inappropriate during Diwali celebrations by many Hindus. The controversy intensified after some British Hindu groups were denied entry into the event. Here's more on the Prime Minister's Diwali disaster.
This year, Diwali wasn't just a celebration of lights in India, it became a global event, making its mark in various parts of the world. From the US President Joe Biden hosting a Diwali bash at the White House, to India's Ayodhya city setting 2 world records, the festivities were as extravagant as one could imagine. However, amidst the grand celebrations, one event in particular became the center of controversy: the United Kingdom's Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Diwali reception. A party that should have left people full of joy, both in their hearts and stomachs, instead left many fuming and disillusioned. Held at 10 Downing Street in London, Starmer's Diwali reception was meant to honour the Hindu festival and bring people together. Unfortunately, it turned into a disaster after some British Hindus raised complaints about the menu. Among the offerings were non-vegetarian snacks and alcohol, choices that are a significant cultural and religious no-go for many Hindus, especially during religious observances. One can only wonder how Starmer missed the memo on this, as he clearly failed to consider the core values of the festival he was supposedly celebrating. While Starmer did make an effort to create a homely atmosphere, complete with traditional earthen lamps symbolizing the victory of good over evil and performances of Indian dance, it all fell apart when cultural insensitivity took center stage. The real issue arose when beer, wine and lamb kebabs were found on the reception tables. According to reports, attendees were appalled by the choices of food and drinks, considering it disrespectful to the religious occasion. This quickly branded the British Prime Minister as someone lacking a basic understanding of cultural traditions. Insight UK, a social movement in the country, expressed their dismay on Instagram, calling out the appalling lack of understanding of the cultural significance of Diwali. This sparked a social media storm, with users criticizing Starmer left, right and centre. And honestly, who could blame them? How can a nation's Prime Minister host a religious celebration without understanding the very traditions he's supposed to be honouring? It feels like nothing short of hypocrisy. This isn't the first time Diwali has been celebrated at 10 Downing Street. In fact, the tradition dates back to 2009, when then Prime Minister Gordon Brown began the practice. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Diwali reception was a glaring misstep that revealed a fundamental lack of cultural sensitivity. What should have been an opportunity to honour a vibrant and cherished tradition instead became an embarrassing affair that sparked outrage. After all, it's more than just a photo op or a stage for performances.
That does it for us today. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks again for watching.